But now we have a change, and here's a short video to introduce our guest speaker.
G'day, my name's Beau Miles. I'm 37, about to turn 38. I am an outdoor educator and I live on a small farm, little 5 acres, about 100 k's east of Melbourne. Beautiful little spot. This footage you're about to see, this is what I've been up to for the last 15 odd years. I paddled a sea kayak around South Africa and Mozambique for 5 months. Hell of a formative experience. I did that about 10 years ago and it has shaped me as an adult. I think I was a boy when I started and a man when I popped out the other side. I then ran across the Australian Alps, ran from Canberra to just out of Melbourne, first bloke to do it. It was tough. I'd never run, 14 marathons in a row over the mountains. So, yeah, that was a big old test, psychologically too, because my body didn't break down enough. So it was that thing, do you keep going or do you pull up? And I kept going. I'm quite proud of that. I've recently paddled across Bass Strait from the Australian mainland down to Tassie. I did that part of my PhD as well, so I'm a new doctor of adventure, if you can believe it. And so I'm on the other side of that just now. So I'm up in the mountains, that's where I am, trying to lose the gut after being on the PhD wagon. So I'm doing some guiding up here for some people over the next few days. So I'm in this lovely time of my life after PhD, after the expedition, where I'm sort of getting back to a regular rhythm. I'm a good problem solver and I really like simple living, and that's what expeditionary life does. It really strips back all our complex lives and our screened lives with emails and phones and constantly on computers and whatnot, and so I really look forward to that break. Very opposite to a PhD.
So, Beau Miles, self-described as a filmmaker, poly-jobist, speaker, writer and odd, is our guest speaker this evening. Some of you may know him as the man who walked 90 kilometres to work. Others from his new book, The Backyard Adventurer. We are delighted that he can be with us here this evening. And if you have any questions for Beau following his presentation, put them in the chat and we'll endeavour to get them to him at the end of his presentation. So please welcome Mr. Beau Miles, or Dr. Beau Miles, perhaps I should say. Welcome, Beau.
No, some thumbs up from folks. I don't know, you kind of fly a bit blind on these things. I'm sitting up in my little cabin. In fact, it's my wife's cabin. I just built it. But this is where she works. And it's been storming all day. And I've been noticing, I've been a bit of a voyeur looking at all of your photos wherever you are in your workplaces or having barbecues or outside, and you're all in one layer of clothing. And here I am in, I've got a puffer, I've got a vest, and then I've got a Gore-Tex. I don't have them a layering right because I've just been dressing incrementally throughout the day. And then several layers under that. I've got 5 layers on and it's snowing in the hill behind me at the moment. So you bastards, Queenslanders. I'm down here in Victoria freezing my tail off in a little shed on top of a hill. So it's nice to be sort of surrounded by your warmth. What I'm going to have a yarn to you about, and look, before I do get into this, and it's not a big PowerPoint presentation, or I've only got 10 or 12 slides to show you folks, but what you're about to see is sort of my transition from the outdoor life to, in many respects, the indoor life. But then how I make that work, because by nature and by instinct, I'm very much an outdoor person. But what that bio was, I sent through that video to the crew earlier today. That was actually my Survivor audition tape about 5 or 6 years ago. And I was in the final cut before it went to air. So I was the final sort of 20 or 30 people in 2018 out of 20,000 people that applied. And I think they missed out on a great opportunity to have a good, fun Australian bloke on the show. But there you go. I failed miserably. But that was my audition tape for that. And I thought, oh, it's a nice little fun thing to send up as an audition. Yeah, I look forward to your questions if you've got some. I'm going to bang on for about 15 or 20 minutes about my outdoor life and about my transition from being a guide for 20 years to my world now as a YouTuber and as a dad and as a writer. So by all means, send your questions through. And if I don't see them, Mark will, by all means, reiterate things. So what you've got here is I mean, they're my two worlds in some respects, the play button and when I can get outside. These two chosen professions in some respects are quite at the opposite ends of the spectrum, and yet they're really linked. And in fact, I have to make them linked. But what is really fascinating about my life now as an outdoor person, and this will speak to a lot of you folks, is that a lot of people think that there's a hierarchy of experiences. That, for example, going for a run where you film it and that you don't have that lovely flow state of going for a run is less of an experience than if you don't film it and you go out there for this pure, unadulterated 20 or 30 minutes or 2 hours, whatever it is you go for. So I'm going to touch on a little bit of that. And it also talks about the hierarchy of feelings and how we use our senses, and how I have come full circle now. And as a 40-some-year-old bloke, I'm very much into more bang for buck, less time traveling to get to exotic locations, and I'm all about backyard adventuring. I mean, here's an example of the hierarchy of experiences. When you see this picture of myself and my daughter down at the coast, we're not in Queensland, clearly. She's wearing a jumper in the water. So our water there is about 10 degrees. This is a lovely scene of just me and my daughter having an experience. And in fact, she's a COVID kid. So this was her first time at the beach, almost 2 years old. That's a lovely, pure experience of my daughter and me. Clearly someone's taking a photo, that's my wife. And in fact, I did make a film that week we were at the beach. So you have this play button now attached to this memory. People then very much jump on the idea that then I've adulterated this experience to be something pure and lovely and very family orientated, to something that's screenified and is no longer as good as the real thing. I happen to believe that. I think that's true. I think I would much rather be there with my daughter than making a film about being there with my daughter. But that doesn't mean something like a film can't get you some incredibly rewarding feedback loops with life, which is what I'm pursuing now via YouTube. One of the funny things I always found about the outdoor sector is that the better at it you get, the less of it you do. I found myself as the head of outdoor education at Australia's largest university, working my tail off as a guide for many years and doing my master's and PhD and going through the grind and loving it actually. But I found myself in this power of leadership, or this position of leadership, and I was no longer able to guide anymore because it was not seen as worthwhile as writing a paper or an article about guiding. And I thought, well, isn't that a huge conundrum? And in fact, I'm kind of living that now as I've gone away from the university sector. I'm in a screen just as much, or in front of a screen just as much. So this is my big midlife crisis of how much screen time I have compared to reality, but what are the compromises within that? I saw this Telstra, lovely Telstra. I love Telstra. I'm beamed to you at the moment from my cabin on top of the hill via Telstra, via a little hotspot. But when I saw this in my local town, I was really put out by the fact that a camping scene with kids in their sleeping bags watching a screen is an advertising tool for our big telecommunications company. I thought, this is crap. I don't want to live in that world. And then I thought, hang on, Beau, you're a YouTuber. They could be watching you on that screen right now. What's going on? You know, what is my relationship with this scene that I was repulsed by? But the fact that, you know what, I'm playing to this very thing, and that great reception around Australia and people's availability for my films on their phones makes me my income. This was quite a shock to me, the fact that I was repulsed by the photo, but then when I thought about it, I thought I can't be, and I'm very much feeding into that. The great conundrum of, and that's what I called this presentation to you folks, is, you know, I call myself now this backyard adventurer, and I say things like, you know, you should go and do things rather than watch them on a screen. And yet here I am feeding into that very thing, to the point where backyard adventuring is so important to me now, because I've been lucky enough to have 20 years of non-backyard adventuring. So when a lot of folks say, hey, Beau, have you found the new way, the new form of outdoor education, the new form of outdoor life, where you only go 20 kilometers from where you grew up and that's it, and you can get your your life's worth of experiences in that radius, I have to say, you know what? No, that's kind of not what I'm advocating. I think that's part of the puzzle. But I had this amazing counterpoint before becoming this backyard adventurer, living overseas for 20 years, constantly traveling and constantly being as far away from my backyard as possible before I realized just how amazing it was. And now I want all this bang for buck in my closed circuit. Some of you may have seen the sort of my latest film on YouTube called Bad River, or it was a couple of months ago now, actually, where I went down the Cooks River in Sydney. The shocking part about this river is, or rather the huge insight into the Bad River series, there's 3 more to come out, is that they're all in Australia and they are all, in some respects, rivers that I never would have paddled 20 years ago. Why paddle the sickest, unhealthiest, most polluted rivers in Australia? They're not nice experiences. They're very confronting. They're unhealthy. I could potentially become unhealthy. They're illegal. 3 out of the 4 trips were bordering on illegal, and I'd have to be sort of dodging the authorities the whole time. But the insight from these localized, not pretty, unhealthy environments was incredibly profound. Very much like the most pure, the highest, the longest, you know, so as an opposite of what classic adventure might be, or what a lot of classic leisure is, very pleasurable. They've certainly shaped my life. It's kind of as if I'm having experiences again as a 10-year-old, where I'm having really formative experiences again. I'm having them as a 40-year-old, and it's incredibly empowering. I thought I'd jump around just momentarily. Rather than talk about, I suppose, just my film life and how that is reshaping the way I think of outdoor life, it's my interpretation of the world when I am there. And so Angus McMillan, I don't suppose many Queenslanders would know much about him. He's essentially a Leichhardt type character to your Queensland, you know, early explorer, pastoralist, colonial fella that went out and was part of the whole sort of empire building party. I was in McMillan House when I was a kid. You know, I was a yellow kid. I'd go around in a yellow T-shirt that was called McMillan, and I thought he was a hero. And I'm, you know, I'm 42 years old, so this happened 30 odd years ago. I was a McMillan representative, 120 years after the bloke lived. It turns out that McMillan, like a lot of those early pastoralists, he was a violent man and was part of huge atrocities to the First Nations folks. And that's all coming to light now. And yet, of course, there's still lots of things called McMillan. When I found out that McMillan had a walking track named after him and it hadn't been run, I thought, right, here's a really good idea. It's a backyard adventure. It's in my backyard. I'm now sitting in a small cabin on West Gippsland country, Kurnai country, that McMillan helped open up. I'm very much living the rewards of his early life, or of his life in Australia. So I thought, right, I'm going to go and run this track, and I'm going to try and figure out a better form of history for me to tell my daughters. I've got a 6-month-old daughter and a 3-year-old daughter, and I don't want them to be in McMillan House. I don't want those sort of untruths to be taught to them. So I recently ran across the track and have made a film series about it, and lo and behold, it's the hardest thing I've ever had to make as a story. Because, you know, I'm just a lucky, educated white bloke telling this story of how I live in 5 acres of Eden and I want to find out a bit more about my history. It has to go a bit deeper than that, and I have to figure out some ramifications of where I'm at in life. That's not being guilty, that's not being sad, it's just being more informed. But how does that look in story form? And it's been the hardest film I've had to ever make. Hardest to the fact that it comes in multiple ways. I got my ass completely kicked by the trail the first time I did it. It was too hot. I baked my kidneys and had to be not evac'd out of there, but I certainly had to get my cotton socks out of the mountains and home to somewhere where I could drink electrolytes. 15 weeks later, I went back and I was able to run the track. It was incredibly, you know, a little bit like the Bad River experience, quite confronting in that I'm running this track that has such laden history to it. And that I'm only just discovering it now as this 42-year-old bloke who's had all this education and has missed all this vital local information in my outdoor life. Staggering beauty. I was blown away by it at times, to the point where I often got distracted with why I was there, which was a very good thing. Great distraction to have such an empire of nature and landscape around me. But this first trip in particular, when I was suffering so much, I didn't give Macmillan a second thought, Angus Macmillan. I certainly did on this second one when my body was able to allow that, and I wasn't just selfish about the intentions of the trip. And of course, like all good trips, you end up at the pub at the end of it to reflect on what just took place. In a real whirlwind, they opened up the pub for me, and I had this great final experience out there in the mountains before reflecting on it. I suppose that's kind of where I'm at now, in a sense of my storytelling. It has to be more just about Beau's inner monologue. They're not just vlogs. They have to be slightly historical. They have to agitate something. They have to be fun. The outdoors has to be fun. Otherwise, our next generation, well, they want to go out there when there's fun to be had on a computer screen. So I really love the very simplistic idea of just make it fun. Provocations too, you know, 16-year-olds love having a provocation in the outdoors, as in a really good, deep and meaningful chat about why we're there, what we're doing there, who was here before us, all the historical layers. Make that accessible, and you know, you have a ball yourself, let alone the people you're with. So I think that's a really important part now. If I was to ever return to guiding, I would very much make that front and center. This is the project I'm working on today. In fact, when I chatted to Mark and the team today for a trial of the technology of this very chat I'm having with you now, I was in the midst making the screenplay for this Bad River, the second episode. This is where I descend the most polluted, thickest river in Australia. It happens to be in Tasmania, amongst some of the most incredible wilderness you can imagine. The banks of the river itself are vibrant to the point where you would think that the Tassie tiger still exists. But the river itself is dead, completely and utterly dead. No, it cannot support life whatsoever. The contrast in these experiences, as I sort of mentioned before, is incredibly powerful. I wonder if your sector up there in Queensland, and I'm sure it does, you're progressive in the outdoors, has some of these provocative experiences out there that shake people's status quo, in a sense. You know, what they think is a great outdoor experience and why, based on what ingredients. I'm tending to look for adventures now that have these volatilities to them, simply because it makes me think more and I suppose question humanity and my place in it. What I've aimed to do, folks, I think I've done okay, is rattle on for about 20 minutes so that we can have 5 minutes of chat. I know that there's 20 or 30 or 50 of you out there in cyberland, or 100 of you. I'd love to chat to you and answer your questions. So before I give you my Beauisms on Insta, or go to YouTube and subscribe to me and earn me lots of money by watching my films or buying my awesome 7 out of 10 book, I thought, yeah, I'd love to chat to you. So are there any questions right off the bat? Mark might have some that have fed through the chat room or something, but otherwise, shoot.
So, but thank you, Beau. I knew this was going to be interesting. I knew it was going to be fun, but I didn't quite expect it to be perhaps as challenging as it's been. I really enjoyed hearing about Macmillan and the idea of provocative experiences. I think that's something that we need to explore further and actually ask people about the experiences they've had that have been particularly personally challenging, not from a physical perspective, but more from, as you've been talking about, the mental, historical, the I guess, reaction to the place and what it's been in the past. I think it's a great idea.
That's well said, Mark. Because you can emphasise leisure too much to be just purely pleasurable. And I think that's fantastic. Of course, we're always going to default to pleasure in our outdoor lives, and that's a good thing. But sometimes when there's that sweet and sour element of why we're out there, what we're doing, and what we're thinking while we're doing it, I think that's really excellent, because it gives yourselves over to the potential of your brain. You know, our thinking capacities are so potent, and I think why not have these best of both worlds of the physical body moving and do an action out there, but you're thinking all these wonderful things as well.
I like taking photographs in the outdoors, and one of the things I like taking photographs of is when I come across like an old car being wrecked and dumped down a gully somewhere, for instance.
Yes.
I hate the idea that it's there, but they make fantastic photographs, and I like the contrast between this sort of wrecked bit of human waste and some beautiful bush. You know, and it gets me thinking too. You know, just how the hell could somebody do this? But it's extraordinary that these things survive, and they'll probably survive for decades and decades out there as well.
Well, do you know what you've just said there? That's very much a metaphor for what I've done with McMillan's walking track, is that you can go in and take out all those old car bodies, and that's fine and that's good. But maybe they're not doing a whole bunch of harm because the harm has been done. They've been put there and they're now rusting away doing their thing. It's much the same with McMillan's walking track. There's a lot of people that say McMillan's name should still be there in some way, shape or form, so that we know of the atrocities he did, and that let's not do that again. Let's not repeat that. Now, that's a huge part of the Black Lives Matter movement, and I'm certainly not overly opinionated about it, but it certainly gives you that good impression. How much of the past do you make up front, and how much do you then put by default all of these memorandums of understanding next to it, you know, to layer up the history? So do you take the car body out, or do you leave it there because it's a teaching point?
Certainly, I'm very encouraged by the fact that we're having these conversations now, and things are starting to shift and starting to move. That's a very positive thing.
Good
Mate,
point.
I just wanted to point out too, just thinking about your very opening comments about where you are in your wife's shed up the back of the property, and dressed up in your puffer jacket. We've got the air conditioning on here in this room, because if we didn't, I'd be running down my face, the sweat. So we are in the same country but in different worlds.
Oh, I think it's wonderful. I mean, Australia is remarkable. We are. The fact that we have the tropics right down to Tassie, where you've got these giant platypus running around, it's awesome. The fact that we are having this conversation now, and you've got the aircon on, and I need to crank out that little pot belly now.
Yeah. So just in terms of questions, what's next? I hear you're talking about some the trail videos coming out and some more river videos coming out. Yeah.
So I mean, this is kind of a blatant plug for my YouTube channel, but it's worth checking out for the outdoors, I suppose. I'm going to try some different films leading up to Christmas, as in shorter format films. If there's one thing I'm not very good at, Mark, it's short storytelling. I tend to wax on and bang on way too much about context and subtext. So I'm going to try and force my hand by making a lot of short films between now and Christmas. Now, I don't quite know exactly what they'll look like, because they haven't been shot yet. They've been sort of conceptualized. But in the meantime, the big projects that have been burning away for a year or two are things like Bad River, the series, the McMillan Run, which is called A Bloody Long Run, sort of a play on words there. And then a whole bunch of other small, all outdoor related, or making things out of junk, or, you know, all these kind of, I try and stitch in a whole bunch of themes to my films. And yeah, they're all coming out on YouTube. Bad River, the book, is going to come out next year, so I'm trying to skulk away from the house at 4 a.m. in the morning to try and write up here in the studio. So I'm as busy as I've ever been, and it's a real, it's a super busy part of life, and I love it. It's really good.
I shall definitely be looking out for those videos, and I just finished reading your book yesterday and thoroughly enjoyed that, so thank you for that.
Oh, thank you.
My pleasure. So, I've been handed another question. So, where would you encourage young children to find their own backyard ventures and learn to tell their story?
That is a great question. My interpretation of that question is, how do we empower them to find their adventures? They will find it. They're the best person in the world to go and find adventure, a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 15-year-old. They can find adventure. We've got to trust them to do that. So it's about giving them boundaries that are reasonable and within the realm of safe and not bonkers. You know, we're not sending them off to another country or to another watershed that we can't find them. But I'm not the best qualified for that because I've always guided 20-year-olds generally, so young adults. Now I'm thrown into the boiler with a 3-year-old and a 6-month-old because I don't know what I'm allowed to let them climb or what roads they can run on or walk on. So it's about finding those thresholds of where you can let them find adventure and trusting yourself with that. And I essentially just default to my wife. She's got a much better gauge of what is good for a 3-year-old and not. I'm not very good at it. So it's about finding that out.
Yeah, it sounds like a sensible way to do it, to default to the wife.
Well, it means you stay married too. There's some certain things we've got to protect ourselves from in life.
Yeah, indeed. And I would imagine this might be another film or another book in a few years' time, how to be a parent of an adventurous child,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I know Freya Hofmeister, amazing woman. You may have remembered. Yeah, she paddled around Australia. I still think she's the most amazing paddler in the world to ever be seen. She's remarkable. And she, I remember her and her little one, she used to paddle her with her little one in the front hatch. Just pad her out with some floating devices and away she'd go. Really, really amazing stuff. And, I'm sure it's not very safe in many people's worlds, but I was fairly enamored by it.
Fantastic. Well, I think that maybe might a good place to wrap it up, being fairly enamoured with an adventure. So, Listen, thank you very much, Beau, for coming along tonight and being part of our awards evening. I was pleased that we ran into you, pleased that I ran into you in the Blue Mountains a few weeks ago, and very pleased that you've been able to be part of this event. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. If I was half an hour late, I'm sorry. I was here earlier and then came back. And congratulations to everyone. I sat through the first few awards before I had to go and put a kid to sleep. But thank you for having me. I love the idea of your warmth up there, and the exotic nature of putting on an air conditioner is just radical. That's so cool.
Well,
so,
feel free to come by and visit us one day, Beau, and enjoy some of the warmth in Queensland.
Oh, you bet. Well, yeah, it's a real shame this wasn't live. I would have been on a plane yesterday doing exactly that.
Well, maybe we'll get you back another day when we go live.
Good on you.
All right.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everyone, and congratulations.
Thanks, Beau. Good night. So there we go, Beau Miles, our guest speaker for this evening. And if you wanted to find out more about Beau, you can find him on beaumiles.com or his social media channels. Clearly, YouTube is a place to go check him out.